Welcome to the Wandering Tangent podcast. I'm BJ, with me is Jeff, and once more, we are joined by Gary, a.k.a. mutual friend.
Yes.
Now,
He's here, yes.
Now, I was supposed to get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way. Our more observant listeners will be thinking to themselves, gee, what do you mean we're being joined again by Gary? Well, you see, through the magic of podcasting, I didn't realize until after we had recorded our first episode with Gary that Gary would be able to join us on this, our special edition episode that's come out on the 4th of July.
Yay, special edition!
Special edition.
We never thought we'd have special editions.
It's a special edition which is like any other edition, but kind of patriotic.
BJ,
Yeah.
You forgot what we discussed in that one. You're supposed to try to call me mutual friend. Yeah,
that's
I can see
that's
the
a spoiler
failure.
alert for the new episode, or the old episode, or anyway.
Yeah.
So instead of doing the song and dance and pretending like this is Mutual Friends first episode, we're just gonna do his debut episode second, because we already announced that we were gonna do Batman first after we did Unbreakable. So
Yeah, well, they'll figure it out. They'll just, whatever.
that's what we get.
Maybe like one person out there might actually pay attention to the lineup that we give at the end of of these recordings, but whatever. People are like, whatever.
That's what
whatever.
we get for pretending like we have a plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
We pretended we had a plan, and it wasn't long before we abandoned that pretend plan. Exactly.
Oh yeah, join us next time for Gary / Mutual Friends debut episode.
Yep.
Not this episode. So yeah. But anyway, because it's Independence Day, we are actually not watching Independence Day. Instead, we are watching the 1993 Civil War epic Gettysburg.
All right.
It was close enough.
And-
It was Gettysburg was on, and the battle was close to the 4th of July. So
Yeah, the Battle of Gettysburg took place from the 1st to the 3rd of July, and on the other side of the country during the Civil War, the city of Vicksburg surrendered the grant on the 4th of July, so that was an important week for the Union during the war. So yeah, we're being historical. Look at us go.
Wow.
Isn't it interesting, though, just how both of those major events just happened to coincide, along with another historic major event? Even though, like, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, it kind of happened over a 2-month period, but still, like, July 2nd was the beginning, and July 4th was probably somewhat of the apex of it, and then it went on for months. But still,
Well, I don't
it's
know
interesting
about
that at
making
least the holiday lines up with it. Yeah.
I don't know about making a battle happen on command. I don't think it's as we'll get into in the movie, and then the actual history of the fact. Making a battle happen on command is dang near impossible. But making a surrender happen on a specific day, I'm pretty sure the Union was like, hey, can you guys wait like another month or so? We just want this to be really historically relevant. And then the Southerners were probably like, oh, fine, whatever, you stupid Yankees.
Well, Vicksburg had,
I don't know history as well. What are we talking
from
about?
what I recall, Vicksburg had been under siege for quite some time, so considering the fact that the people inside Vicksburg were probably starving, I don't think they would have been like, okay, yeah, we'll just sit here and starve and get shelled for another month so that it looks good on paper.
So BJ, why did you pick this movie?
So, kind of what we already mentioned, I had looked ahead on our calendar and saw that one of our episodes was set to come out exactly on the 4th of July. So,
But this is an interesting 4th of July movie because it's about the division of a country that somehow survived through that division.
I didn't think that hard about it.
We're like, hey, it happened around July 4th. It's kind of connected.
It's like, you know what? At some point, I watched Gettysburg. I liked it. The Battle of Gettysburg came on the 4th of July, and that everyone would expect us to do something like Independence Day on the 4th of July. I didn't
Yes. We never do anything that's normal and expected. That's for sure.
I mean, I was thinking about another movie, and this is partially your fault. I don't know if you remember, but I gave you the choice between Gettysburg and the other movie, because the other movie also kind of takes place on the 4th of July, or part of it does, and is some of the classic American movie. But
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah. My recent history memory gets wiped. It gets written over 1,000 times.
Jeff clears his search history quite often.
Yeah,
I could imagine a few movies.
My browser's
that would be classic, and actually probably be a lot more in the wheelhouse of a lot of your other shows and lineup. But this one was different. I could definitely.
It's a great movie though.
So
who wants to go first? Gary, tell us what is, without any spoiler stuff so far, what is your assessment of this movie, and do you recommend it?
Regardless of my recommendation, I imagine this is probably required watching in just about every child's junior high or high school American history thing. They're probably, ever since 1993, this has probably been required watching in every history department because of historical accuracy, and also it's 4 hours, and that's practically an entire week that a teacher can just take off. So
okay. So it's perfect for the classroom.
Oh yeah, it's perfect for the classroom.
And recommending it's kind of in vain because people are going to be forced to watch it anyway because they're eventually going to go through school.
But But having said that it's required watching, I am going to say they do try to make it as entertaining as possible while also retaining historical accuracy, which is the nice balance, which is one of those really good balances for historical movies.
Well, just as a point of order, I did not watch it in junior high.
Oh.
Really? You never had to?
No, did you have to?
I want to say probably. I don't know. I'm such a nerd. I watch history stuff like this anyway.
Because back in my day, the big Civil War movie they would have us watch in 8th grade was a different movie. It was actually Glory. But my year in 8th grade was like the one year they said we probably shouldn't show a graphic radar movie to a bunch of 8th graders. So the year before us watched it. We didn't get to watch it. The year after us watched it. But my year was apparently the anti-Glory year for whatever reason.
It was the 1 year where they're like, no, you know, education's not that important. Let's just keep them young and wholesome, which totally happens. And kids stay that way forever, of course.
My history teacher was like, oh, I get to just shut my brain off for a week. Kids, I got this movie. Watch it. Anyways.
Okay, BJ, so give us your recommendation. Do you recommend it? Who do you recommend it to? Is it a good movie? Is it weird, controversial? Is it too far from historical reality? What is it?
It's a good movie. Is it controversial? Let's say it does spend a bit more time on the Confederate side than the Union side.
Okay.
It was made at a point in time, 1993, where maybe historical figures like Robert E. Lee were held in a bit higher regard than they are today. I'm trying to phrase this as not political as possible because I don't know if you want to go there or not.
And when we get to spoilers, I'm going to have a few things to say about Robert E. Lee too. So
So, and also it is, I guess depending on which version you watch, it is a 4-hour plus movie. So keep that in mind. It did take me most of an afternoon to watch it.
It'll take about 8 loads of laundry to get through if you're fast. If you're slow like me, maybe like 3 or 4. Because I fold like one shirt every 5 minutes, so it takes a while.
Wait. What kind of dryer do you have that dries a load of laundry in a half hour?
I don't know. It kind of. You're right. I'm just. It's like an AU, BJ. It's just a certain measurement. I don't know.
It's like an AU. What was the other we were talking about? A league.
I know. I can't even make laundry comments without you specifying how inaccurate I am.
I mean, if There was a snarky comment I had thought about, but I'm like, oh, that might be too snarky even for me. It'd be a very deep cut if I made it, so I don't know if I want to make it or not.
Well, now you have to. You've
Okay.
just awakened the curiosity of the 5 people who are listening. So go ahead.
Okay. Okay, you asked for it, so here we go. So Gary, I think we've got mentioned this to you, but me and Jeff agreed to watch the director's cut because that was the one I happened to buy back when I bought it. So that means that Jeff automatically liked it less because according to his rant in Star Wars, the director shouldn't go back and add stuff in because the first print is a thing of art and should not be changed, blah blah blah. There's my deep cut. I feel bad about saying
A director's
it now.
cut isn't necessarily adding things in.
Yes, it is! It's the
but
same
it's-
thing as
No.
a special edition.
It
How?
is
How is it different?
because it was filmed. It was all came from the original production. So yes, and here's the thing: a
There was still
director's
something he went back and added into the original cut.
yes, but they were all
But-
original content. Even though they weren't part of the original cut, they were part of the original making of the movie.
So-
And the director's cut does not override the theatrical cut. That's a distinctive difference. And Star Wars, if Star Wars adds things and then overrides the original theatrical cut, then that's where I say, nuh-uh, in where I can't have no power to actually determine anything, but I disagree with it.
So just because the director of this movie was able to get all the shots he wanted to at the time, and so because George Lucas couldn't, and I've gone and I've watched some clips of George Lucas saying, the special edition is the cut I wanted to make in the first place, but didn't have the technology to do. But so the director cut of Gettysburg is fine because that's just scenes that the director happened to add in, but the special edition of Star Wars is not fine because it's stuff that the director had to go back and make the movie he wanted to make in the first place.
Sure.
I see. That makes total
Sure.
sense.
No, listen,
I'm
if
sorry
you
to drag you
make
into
it,
this, Gary.
I know this is nothing to do. This is what this movie's about. It's about conflict between two people who can't agree on a subject. So
I
apparently,
loved you. You're
which
like a
goes
brother
along
to me.
perfectly with Gettysburg. Look, so
Okay.
yeah. So it's different because
This
the
is why I didn't want
original
to do this, because I knew
theatrical
because I knew this
movie
discussion would happen.
doesn't get override. If you erase
Let
the
me-
original fine.
Okay,
Let me pour ice water on this whole argument and just calm things down in interest of time and sanity, so we don't spend 2 hours just arguing about director's cut versus special edition versus Jeff. What did you think about this movie? Non-spoilers, just an initial concept.
This is a childhood favorite because I would watch this movie and then reenact the moments of this movie on my Risk board when I was alone at home. So, and then I had a book of Gettysburg that had maps of where all the positioning were of all the different units. And I'm not a huge expert on Gettysburg. I think some historian somewhere is going to be 10 times more knowledgeable than me, but I don't know, this movie kind of brought me into the Civil War and the idea of just immersing yourself in another time in order to kind of gain insight into what people thought and what they liked. Now, this movie I would recommend, but so there's historians out there who say, well, what about how this movie doesn't portray this correctly, or this detail's left out, it's an important detail. I almost think there's an analogy here of there's a famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. It's a very famous painting. George Washington is standing up in the boat. The river has huge pieces of ice in the river, and everyone looks cold, and they're rowing, and George Washington looks like a majestic hero leader, and they're going across the Delaware. It's a great painting, but people point out, hey, there was no huge, giant iceberg-looking things in the river. He wouldn't be standing in the boat who stands in a boat? This is a military operation. They're doing this as efficiently as they can. But I think there's a lot to say about that. When you make it, the thing is the painting is a medium where you can't feel the cold of that morning, of the dark night that they cross that river. You can't feel it. Putting those giant icebergs in there, it gives the viewer of the painting a sense of, look how cold this is. And the fact that he's standing in the boat instead of sitting, it shows to the viewer again, that look how this person is bold. Look at that. I mean, his army's in bad shape and he chooses to attack the British. This is a bold thing. And so when it comes to Gettysburg, I think this movie is really great because even though it doesn't like connect all the lines through history perfectly, I think that the representation of history is really well done. And a lot of people disagree with this movie favoring one side or the other, but I actually think amongst all the war movies of the Civil War, this one probably is the best at like doing a very even, balanced representation of both sides. And yeah, they do spend more on the Confederate generals, but let's face it, the Confederate generals, I'm not like a pro-Confederate person, but historically they're very interesting characters in some way. So I get why they spent more time, but they also did a lot of interesting things with the Union too. So yeah, I recommend it.
Historically, the Confederate generals had to be way better because the North basically was the center of industry and population, and for the Confederates to have even thought that they were going to stand a chance, they had to have a higher quality of leadership.
Yeah, and they had to outperform. They knew it,
and they knew, and they didn't have. If they had not had that high quality of leadership available to them, they would have said, "Well, you know, maybe we'll just go back to the whole politics thing. We don't stand a chance militarily." But they did have that high quality of leadership available to them, so that's why they made the choices that they did.
Yep. So it's a good show, and actually one of my favorite things. I still watch this probably like 1 or 2 times a week, which I know is excessive, but I actually use it to put my kids to sleep. So I put it on, and they do see some of the battle scenes, which are very tame for battle scenes. I know they're a little bit graphic, but
it's PG-13. It's very school friendly.
It's very school friendly, but it's the speeches people give. Like, it puts them right to sleep. And they're good speeches. I think it's something to do with the music.
It could also be that there's a million speeches in the movie. It's like every corporal had to have his dramatic speech.
Yeah, and I think that just the attitude of people, they're very calm and deliberate, and what they're saying is kind of interesting to them, and it just like conks them right out. So, yeah, it's funny. They only last about 5 minutes and they're asleep. But so I do catch glimpses of it often. It's a good show.
Yeah, as far as violence goes, it is relatively tame for a war movie because this was originally supposed to be a made-for-TV movie, but they did give it a somewhat limited theatrical release, I believe, from what my research says.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway,
should we get into, well, let's see. Everybody got their shot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, should we get into spoilers and then start talking about what we really think?
So are we going to, can we really spoiler a movie based on history?
Somebody out there is like, okay, which side won?
The Union wins the battle.
BJ, come on, you didn't even say spoiler alert officially.
Yeah, look at me go, I'm a rebel.
I mean,
well, some people might fall asleep in history class.
And several monuments and, you know, a whole bunch of books and whatnot devoted specifically to this particular event.
So that was a question I was going to ask. Have Have any y'all made it back east to like see the Gettysburg battlefield?
I have not.
No, I haven't. I've always wanted to go. I have gone
either.
on many of virtual tours, though, and have seen pictures and listened to tour guides as they're recorded.
It's one of those things it's on the bucket list. It'll happen eventually, just not now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know the actual scenes of that landscape, they look different than in the movie in some way, and I think part of it is because usually the pictures you see of Little Round Top are of the west side of the hill, whereas the battle in this movie happens more on the south side where it's covered in trees from the southern slopes. That's what I would understand. So it like in the movie you see a lot more trees and stuff and less rocks.
Well, historically speaking, it probably wouldn't look as good if they used the nice, if they use the side that has the nice friendly path up to the top of the hill for the tourists to use, right?
Yeah.
Why did the Confederates just walk up the path? That'd be so much easier.
They could have used this nice asphalt road that goes
enough,
right up to the monument.
When you get into the movie, they wanted to use that side of the hill, but hey, I'm guessing we're in spoiler territory.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this a little bit in order, so we're not too much in chaos. Should we talk about the first day, second day, and third day, and talk about the movie from beginning to end? Yeah, we'll keep this organized.
Do we want to be that regimented?
Well, let's try to be regimented and then end up in a giant scattering mess, which happened in the Civil War. They had a plan.
We've done that in the past.
Up, nothing worked.
Trying to go scene by scene has gone poorly for us in the past.
That's true. Okay, let's start with this question. Why do you think this movie really portrays why this battle started and communicates that to the audience? Do you think that it does that effectively? It has this cool little map where it shows you everything. It is kind of fun, I think. But what do you guys think of it?
Well, the South historically, the South wanted a victory in the North to show the North, hey, we can fight you anywhere. We just want to be left alone, right? That's what the South wanted at the time. So they started marching into the North because the majority, in fact, everything had taken place in what was considered the South at the time. So, yeah, they needed a victory. They needed to show they had power projection outside of their own territory to be able to force peace on the Union, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I've actually heard something. There's a theory that the real thing that causes wars to be won and lost, it comes down to will, political will. The side that decides to stop fighting is the one that gets the lesser in the peace agreement.
Well, I've heard that too from it's summed up by my military history teacher. He went into it saying exactly that. It's the victor is, or the quote unquote loser of a war is the person who decides to stop fighting first. That's the loser of any particular war, and the side that's and you can look at that in history, and that's always been the case. The side that says, okay, we're done fighting is the side always that is the quote unquote loser. So
at least,
the North was getting close to that at this time, and the South felt like they needed just that little bit of a push. And they could do that by having a victory in the North.
Yeah, but it's a question of did the South really have everything it needed to accomplish that? Because you learned in the beginning of this movie that the Confederates are moving without their cavalry, which is really, really an important thing for them to have with them, because they need all those riders on horses to run around the countryside identifying where everything is.
It was the at the time equivalent of our modern GPS. It's in military intelligence. It's the equivalent of our modern satellite system, observation system, and they've always worked hard. And I think it wasn't a choice, though. Didn't they cover that in the movie? They talked about it.
They don't talk about it, actually. They mentioned it. I think Jeb Stuart, who is the cavalry leader, general in charge of the cavalry, he basically says there were reasons. They don't really go into it in the movie, but the reasons is that he found a bunch of supplies, and he was trying to get them back to the Confederate Army, and it just was logistically too difficult for him. So the logical thing would be to destroy everything that he captured, but his army needed those, so he was caught between two things. He had this job to do, but then these supplies were really important, and he just made the decision that he had to carry all these wagons with him, and it slowed him down too much.
Well,
that's my understanding of it.
Well, regardless, Buford, the cavalry general in charge of the Northern Cavalry, was actually doing his job, and that's kind of what led them to this specific spot, because he was actually providing intelligence to the main body of the Northern Army, whereas the Southern Cavalry leader was doing something not that.
Yeah. Yep. So now that's kind of what they kind of open up to in the beginning 30 minutes of this movie is how the Confederate generals, they're struggling to know what's going on in front of them. And it's not something they're used to. They're used to getting all these reports of where things are positioned or not. They know that they hear their soldiers in Gettysburg. They don't know if they're militia or cavalry. There's like different reports, and there's confusion as to what's happening. And there's no group of people on horses to ride around and figure it all out. It's
welcome to war, Jeff. Welcome to war.
Yeah, welcome. And that's the great thing about this movie. It shows you just the chaos involved with all this.
So, according to a quick read of research, look at me, I'm fact-checking as I go. So, Stewart was out of position because he had... so thinking direct route north. Stewart chose to reach Ulsterstrank by... So from what I'm reading real quick, it looks like Stewart had been hoping to capture supplies along the way, but actually didn't, so he was just out of position. He was in the wrong place.
I heard that he did capture some wagons, and he attached them to like the back of his column. But those wagons had mules, and they weren't fast like his other cavalry, and the whole thing made his big, long line slow. Anyway, who knows? I mean, you do get like different writers, different historians kind of like saying other things. It gets kind of difficult. And even like the numbers of this battle, like people have different numbers, and they in different texts can be kind of confusing.
Okay, yeah. Doing some more reading, it does look like he did capture some wagons, but yeah, still, you generally don't want your fast scouting force to be carrying a supply train around.
Yeah, they're not a raiding force, they're a scouting force. You don't want them to be raiding, you want them to be scouting, which is... Anyways, but they do get, as the movie progresses, we find out that's one of those key differences between the two forces is, as Jeff said, the cavalry force for the South was doing that, not what they were supposed to do, and the northern one was doing what they were supposed to do, and that's they getting into scouting. On the other hand, they do he interprets things differently. Do we want to talk about that yet, or I think that's still first day, isn't it?
You can go ahead and talk about it.
The what was his name? The Northern Cavalry General.
Buford,
yes. He played by Sam Elliott because, if you're going to have a person riding around on a horse, being all kind of like running around and shooting guns and having that kind of an old crusty look to him, who else are you going to get, right? He's pretty much, he's always been that character. It's pretty much.
You talking about the actor?
Yeah, the actor, Sam Elliott.
Yes, I do like the actor, Sam Elliott, yeah.
Oh, the casting in this movie is spot on for just about it.
They
worked very hard to get people
definitely.
that not only looked but actually acted like all of the different figures in this particular portrayal.
Not to cut you off here, but I'm going to cut you off here. Yeah, I think for most people, the standout's probably Martin Sheen, who played Lee, but my two favorite were Tom Berenger, who played Longstreet, and is it Jeff Bridges that played
Jeff Daniels.
what was his name? What was his name? I'm looking at
Chamberlain.
Chamberlain. I'm like, Champlain.
Yes.
No, that's not it. A new RVC. Chamberlain. Yeah.
It's Jeff Daniels.
Yeah.
Oh, Jeff Daniels.
Yeah, Jeff Daniels. Oh, it's because they have it broken down in the Confederate Union sites on Wikipedia. I'm like, why don't they have this character's name on there? What are they doing not having Jeff Daniels in this? But there he is. Anyway, I interrupt you, Gary. Go ahead. Welcome to the podcast.
No. So Sam Elliott playing General Buford. So General Buford knows that he needs to get... He knows that the Confederates are in the area, and he knows that that's one thing that's repeated in a line that's repeated a lot, or at least a concept that's repeated a lot in this movie, and also just in historical references. They're looking for good ground, basically a good spot to fight on, where one side can be really particularly defensive and the other side can be hindered in an attack. So the Northern general, the cavalry commander, is looking for a good spot to hold a battle on, at least for the North, and he picks that spot and then sends back and says, "Get to this spot. We'll hold until you get here."
But interesting, they don't actually hold that spot. That's something that always confused me in the movie. In the movie, the General Buford says, because they lose one of the generals. What was it? These names. General Reed?
Reynolds.
No, Reynolds. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. General Reynolds is killed in the battle in the first day.
Mm-hmm.
And so Buford says, "Oh, General Reynolds, we did it. We held the high ground." I mean, it's a really great scene.
Well,
although technically they actually on the first day lost their position.
Yes, but they
retreated
through
the town.
Aiming for that position. They were aiming for the better position up in the hills. They were just they moved forward to a slowing position, and then they were being pushed back to the optimal position, which was the hill, the whole hill area just outside of the town.
It was more of a delay in action the first day because, they were grossly outnumbered.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, they were
even
2 to 1.
The advanced
right?
elements of the Confederate Army grossly outnumbered. It's 20,000 to 2,500. On the other hand, the cavalry had that ability to hit and then reposition very quickly because, they're cavalry. That's what they do.
And this was a special group of cavalry that Buford was commanding because they had modern, the most high-tech rifles. Maybe not the most, but they had new rifles that could be loaded with the cartridge, right? I'm pretty sure they did.
Yeah, they were, and they had light artillery. They were a very well armed force. They were ready to.
Yeah, there's all kinds of arguments to be made that the Union could. Oh well. Why didn't more of the Union have repeaters or whatnot? It's it's because when you have an army, you have to have a standard weapon for the logistics.
Yeah.
Yeah, it also takes time to replace all that and the logistics behind that weapon.
Yeah,
it takes time for all of that to be.
Go ahead.
There's a weapon. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's called the Thompson machine gun. Are you guys familiar with that?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It was at the time the absolute height of its capability in as a submachine gun, right? So it's basically you could it was very nice, right? Well, the thing about the Thompson machine gun was it cost, I think it was somewhere around $200, which doesn't sound that much, but still, it's a price tag. But in World War II, they decided, okay, what are we going to use to equip all of our people? They had some Thompson machine guns, and they could have built more, but then they were like, okay, so what does it do? What can we replace it with? And they ended up building this other one, which was a lot less reliable, but it had the price tag of $20. So
it was nicknamed like the grease gun.
Yeah, the grease gun, and it was a lot less capable, a lot less, but it was like a tenth of the price. So having 10 people armed with grease guns versus having one person armed with a Thompson machine gun, yeah, it's all just about logistics. It's all numbers at that point, And the North and the South both had those equations to work with at the time as well. So most of the people were still using that. I think they had it was cap and ball. It wasn't the full on just powder in a pan, right? It was a rifled musket, but it wasn't a cap musket.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was like a flintlock or anything like that. It wasn't percussion cap?
It was a percussion cap, now that I think about it. It was still black powder, but it was percussion cap black powder, which is a lot more reliable, but you still couldn't have, if it was raining, you'd probably have a really hard time making it work. So.
Yeah, and you would load it faster than rifles previously.
Yeah. But still, it's... Three shots a minute. That's blistering fast at the time. Versus, I think these cavalrymen had those the ones that were breech loading, which were a lot way faster than even that. So, but still nothing like what we have these days. But
Yeah. Well, I think that part of it. This is me, from kind of an armchair historian kind of a thing. But I feel like part of it is just the South was struggling with supplies. The reason why their cavalry is on this, gets so tempted by these supplies is because they don't have as many supplies. They're more desperate. And that causes them to make decisions based on their desperation, not based upon what their mission is.
It's that is a good point, because the North, through multiple reasons, had all the foundries and had all of the kind of technical expertise, as opposed to the South, which was dependent a lot more upon trade with Europe, and the North were, and they go through this in the movie. The Northerners were very successfully blockading the South from getting any sort of trade through, and so the Southerners, while they could eat, could not equip an army. So that was at least not with guns. They didn't have the foundries, they didn't have the factories, and they certainly didn't have as much manpower.
Well, logistics is just part of the leadership game, because as it turns out, two of the more famous generals on the Union side, Grant, and I didn't know this until I actually, by pure chance, started to read General Sherman's autobiography before, not very far into it, but I started reading it before we watched Gettysburg. Turns out both Grant and Sherman had served time as quartermasters, so they knew the logistics game, which helped them be very effective.
Yep, they knew the numbers involved. They knew that if they just kept pushing, then they would win. That's all they needed to do, and that's what won it eventually. But in this particular battle, so circling back around to the point we were talking about, Buford selects this particularly good ground, and then the North, not only do they have a numerical advantage, but they also end up having a position advantage as well, which is just there's a long speech that he goes into in the movie talking about how he visualizes a battle happening, and then he tries to maneuver things in such a way as to have it happen, but to where the North is to an advantage in it. And he succeeds particularly well in that.
It's a really good speech. It is. I don't know if the real people on the field probably even were at a moment where they'd stop and talk about it. But I think it's good to have these speeches because it shows you what's on their mind, even if they never really said it.
The movie feels a lot less like people actually talking, and a lot more like people reading journal entries post fact. Because I don't know if anybody talks this eloquently in real life, but I know people write their journal entries a lot like this in, when they write about things after the fact. So yeah. I'm pretty sure this was he was thinking about it, at least when he was writing it down at that night after everything was said and done. But still.
Yeah.
So he captures this area. The South starts to move into places, pushing them back. What's happening to some of the other people?
Well, they get pushed out because there's 2 Confederate corps, which is something like 20,000, or probably more than that. 2 corps is a lot, and then they can only reinforce with 1 corps, so they're completely outnumbered on the first day.
Yeah, even with my long history of nerddom, I have yet to be able to put numbers to, like, the size of what a regiment is, what a division is, etc., etc.
Well, it's kind of interesting because a lot of these are post-attrition numbers, too. It talks, like, when we get into one of the central figures, and we're talking about the Maine 20th, they're supposedly a regiment which starts at something along the lines of 1,000 plus people, right? Whereas right now they're only about the size of like a overstrength battalion, which, they're like 200 plus soldiers at that point, which is, not a lot. But they're still called a regiment. So it's kind of one of those interesting things about when they talk about military, is they talk about the organizational size, but even
that varies so much.
That varies so much. Even in the most modern, when they try to keep things accurate in modern militaries, there's a lot of leeway. They only go about like general sizes. Like a platoon could have 21 people, because that's two squads. Actually, no, the platoon could have like 11 people, whereas that's 2 squads of 5 people and a leader. That's a platoon technically. Or it could have like 45, where that's like 4 squads of 10 people plus the leader plus his staff. So you like 11 to 45 BJ, and that's both of those are called the same thing. And you could just imagine when we start talking about larger numbers. So that's a very common problem in military matters. The numbers always get fudged.
And it does seem like that when the numbers start out, they don't always start out at the exact same number. Like some of these regiments might be starting at 1,000, and other ones might start at 600. Like it depends on different things.
It's the amount of part of it would also be how much you were getting paid for that, and how much material you would be allocated. So you're always trying to hit these important numbers, so your force was allocated the most you were trying to be allocated the most optimal amount of materials. So you're trying to hit at least the minimum on a lot of numbers. So yeah.
So to pull ourselves out of this nitty gritty rabbit hole I pulled us into, I will pull us out. So since you brought up the 20th Maine, and I think this technically happened before the first day, but we talked about all the speeches in the movie. I think my favorite speech, maybe stereotypically, was Chamberlain's speech to the deserters.
That was a good speech where he was just trying to get them to, well, he was trying to give them an out from their particular predicament. He was saying, you come join us, fight with us, and nobody's going to think twice about, we'll have considered you to have served honorably, the whole thing will be just kind of brushed under the rug of your particular
Well, and I
position.
think part of it is that this movie has a lot of examples, both in Chamberlain, but also in Lee and other people. There's a lot of examples of leadership in this movie. And you see that with Chamberlain. These guys, these people that refuse to fight because they've been through a lot. I mean, I don't judge them for that. That's an enormous 2 years of terrible, terrible Civil War life. And they just feel gypped because their other comrades got to go home. It was some paperwork thing, but no, they have to keep going. It totally doesn't seem fair. A lot of these people are probably not legal experts of any kind.
And also a lot of them sign up, basically that they get like whole towns and cities and neighborhoods, and they'd all sign them all up together. So it wasn't just that they watched their friends go, they were watching literally their friends go. Like, these are people that they hadn't just known in the military, they'd known them for probably most of their lives. And they thought, hey, wait a minute, I signed up with them. What's going on? Why am I not,
My paper says 3 years, their paper says 2 years.
Yeah.
But it's just, even though the papers like legitimately say that, it still doesn't seem fair. And I get it from their point of view. And who knows? Some of those people may not even know how to read. I mean, this was the 1800s. You don't know. I don't know. I'm speculating, of course, but the point is they really do feel like they're treated unfairly. And now Chamberlain is the only person that comes and treats them differently.
Well,
which is, I think, a key thing to him helping them come back and follow leadership.
They are, and I think actually this is, high command didn't want to be, despite there's like a lieutenant or a captain that is like their escort for their escort to get them to the 20th. High command probably wanted exactly what happened in the movie and what happened historically to happen. They just wanted to get these people to a group of people they would identify with. Them coming from the same state was a big thing. It shows it in the movie as well, where they even find a few old friends in the regiment. They're like, oh, wait a minute, I knew you from back in the day. Wait a minute. And so some of them are like, okay, wait, I can, these, we might not have the main second, but now we're part of the main 20th because these are still our main boys, right? And
so I'm going to interject really quick because since we're talking about history, I guess I'm going to fact check as we go. So according to quick search, the literacy rate in 1860 was somewhere between 75 and 90%. So chances are they could read.
Yeah, but
so for BJ, one of them not to be able to read would be
here's another thing. I will interject. Just because a person can read, does that mean that you can read a contract? And
well,
have you ever read a contract? There's people who can. I can't even. That's like a specialized thing right now. And
I think it's not just literacy. It's like paying attention to things.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Who reads the terms of service contract when they click sign to get to whatever they're doing?
I'm not saying this in the herder you're wrong context.
No.
I'm just saying that I think historically, and I'm not saying that this is particularly a us thing. This is just I'm sure the same thing has gone down throughout history, but I think, how to phrase this, I think people in modern times, like throughout history, whatever modern times is connotated as, I think we always think as the people in the past as, oh, those dumb poor people.
No, that's true.
There's another movie. Have you guys covered Evil Dead yet? I think you haven't.
No.
But there's the way he treats them. I think you're right in this, where and that's kind of you think about them, you're like, you primates, you absolute horrible savage, and they're like Middle Ages, and they're like, what are you even talking about, dude? And but yeah, it's and I imagine we kind of have that similar thought. You're right, where we're like, oh, these people they're savages because they're in those historical times. No, they're clever.
They line up in straight lines and chew at each other. Why would they do that? It's like, because that was the most effective technique at the time.
Well, also, people tend to do what they're told, and new ideas kind of have to be worked out first. So, I mean, we probably do a lot of things and we just do them every day, but we don't really. There's obviously a better way of doing it, but we just don't recognize it until somebody else proves it or shows it and teaches it to everyone. And
Well,
I think. Go ahead.
no. But BJ had a point there where that was the most effective military. Obviously, both Both sides were trying for a defensive position. But when you have to assault, you have to assault, and the only legitimate way to assault at the time was get everybody together in a formation and then throw them, because a horde that has no formation is not going to move as effectively as a group of people that is in a particular formation, and they're not going to move with the synchronized manner that you need them to move in. So it looks stupid from a modern fighting perspective, but that was the military doctrine for very legitimate reasons at the time.
Well, it's hard to get a group of people to walk where they don't want to walk, stand where they don't want to stand. It can be very hard, and I think that's part of the reason why they tried to fix that problem for probably thousands of years of training, is to train people to just follow direction without questioning, and to walk as a group. So as the group moves, you feel like this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm walking with everyone.
And you put them in a line, and that's a very important thing. I can tell. Okay, so small thing. I used to jump out of airplanes in the military for reasons, but whatever. One of the key things that made me jump out of an airplane was I was in a line, right? The guy in front of me jumped. The guy behind me wanted to jump, so I just knew I had to jump. You put a person in a line, and they will do what the line is doing. And it kind of even overrides that whole fear thing. So you're right. Like, it's real life. That is really what happens. So I guess, you put people in this giant line of people and march them towards what is most likely certain doom, and they'll do it.
I mean, there's the old, I don't want to call it like an urban myth. Like, there's the old idea that, oh well, the Americans won the Revolutionary War because, oh well, the Americans were like shooting from behind cover and blah blah blah. It's like, well, no, they tried to find people that teach the Americans to fight at the military standards of today, because I'm not a real expert on the Revolutionary War, but the revolutionaries got their butts kicked by the British for a good chunk of the war.
They did. Until they managed to get the right number of people trained to the right capability, they were always on the back foot.
Oh yeah, I guess it just comes back around to, I guess, the kind of off the side point I was making before, is that, like I said, I think there's sort of and again, it's not just a us thing. I'm sure it's gone down through all of history. We tend to judge people by our knowledge in the modern day, and that's not always entirely fair.
No, it's not fair.
As we leave the first day of the movie and move into the second day, I think it's fair to point out something. Okay, I'm going to make a few people have to. Maybe they're going to be angry at me. So let's get
angry comments. Let's go.
And nobody will listen to this anyway. Go ahead.
There's a myth. There's a myth. Just as much, there's a mythical history in this particular war. There's a mythical history in the Revolutionary War of the great General George Washington, and I'm not going to dispel that one because he actually was a really good general. But in the Civil War, there's a grand myth of the General Lee, how he was the world's best general. And I think very fairly in this movie, it starts to poke a few holes in that particular myth. It starts to point out, because he's making calls versus the General Longstreet, who was one of his closest advisors. He kept him, and the fact that he was willing to listen to him so much in the movie, even though he was basically saying what you're doing is stupid. But
it's also other generals too,
yeah.
like A.P. Hill, or I believe.
Hood for
Hood. No, you're right. It's Hood. I'm thinking
Hood.
of Hood. Also, greatly disagreed with him too.
Hood
Go ahead.
and
Keep
Longstreet
going.
both disagree a lot with the way, because Longstreet, even as the battle is starting to get into it, he's like, no, we need to disengage and move to an area of our choosing, and then they will fight us on that. We'll be the defenders and they'll be the attackers. And Lee is like, no, the war's here, the battle's here, we're gonna fight here. This is the spot. We can do this. Because
to defend Lee a little bit here, it is still a factor. Maybe it wasn't the right thing to do, but the thing is if he does leave, what are the newspapers going to say? What are the soldiers going to think? He has to think about that. And anyway.
Well, no.
Yeah, go ahead.
That you do have a point there, but Longstreet is looking at this from that point, from the point of view is he sees this defensive position that they have, that the North is able to have. He probably sees the same thing that General Buford saw. Once he sees this, he's like, oh shoot, this is the wrong place to be fighting from an attacking point of view, because there is not if the Northerners can manage to hold on to this particular position and the South just plows in, or if a defender holds on to this position and is sufficiently reinforced and an attacker just throws themselves at it, this is not a good position, and attrition will start to take its toll.
Well, it's something
that the South could do. They could.
Go ahead, BJ.
I was going to say, it's sort of a dichotomy between the two in the movie. The Union generals keep saying what great ground this is, about the same time the Southern generals, more than one Southern general, was like, oh, I've never seen such terrible ground.
Well, yeah. There's another problem they have. It's not just the ground, but they talk about this also. The Confederate Army is not concentrated. They're still in travel mode, where they're traveling separately on different lines to try and converge on something. So they're scattered, and if they're going to attack, they've got some of their armies still a day away, and so they're going to only attack in pieces rather than all together. And they have that problem as well.
Versus the North,
that was really a problem on the North side, wasn't it?
Both sides had that problem, and it's just whoever got to the good position first with the most. That's typically how a lot of battles happen. I had a person who was a martial arts trainer talk to me about it, and is like, so typically in a fight, the person whose friend shows up first, that's going to be the winner. It doesn't matter your training or your capability. It's just whoever shows up with the first with the most. And that's true in war as well. So,
well, and they don't really mention it too much, but I know on the second day, one of the reasons, this is one of the key things that people talk about, is on the second day, Longstreet chose not to attack in the morning of the second day. He got his orders in the morning, but he waited until around 3 o'clock because he had so many units that were just so far away, and he didn't want to attack until he got them all together.
And didn't he want to hit like more on the flank than he did?
Yes, he did, and then also Hood did.
Yeah. This is the day where we get into Little Round Top, right?
Yeah.
And that's from Chamberlain's point of view. This is where things get really spicy, because he's right there on the flank, and it's probably one of the more dramatic moments in the entire movie.
Yeah. The movie doesn't cover a lot of detail of the Little Round Top battle, and there's also a whole other battle that happens on the other flank on the right that it doesn't talk about. But it's a 4-hour movie. It's already a lot, but how much can you really cover? This Gettysburg battle could have probably another 4 hours. It could be an 8-hour thing to really cover all the stuff that happened.
They filled entire libraries with books on this particular battle alone, much less everything that happened in that particular war. So 4 hours isn't going to cut it for everything, but it does cover some key moments in some of the more important areas. But yes.
I think it's the gist of what happened at the Little Round Top across.
The one thing it doesn't talk much about, it doesn't talk about General Sickles, which is one of the big Union blunders of the Gettysburg battle, where they almost lose the battle on the second day because, obviously there's a lot of hearsay, nobody knows for sure, but I guess General Sickles was on Little Round Top. Everything on the Union line was right where General Reynolds wanted everything to be. And General Sickles was like, well, since I'm so smart and smarter than everyone else, I'm going to move my guys ahead to better ground. And so he does it. And General Reynolds then, as soon as he finds out, he rides over to try and meet with them and said, why did you just move your army out from the line? Now we're no longer a line. We had a line. We were all together. Now you moved forward, and now you're out there alone. You can be flanked, and they can come from all sides. But General Sickles was not a military trained person at all. He was in that position because of his influence in government and probably his wealth and other things. He didn't have any real training per se. Yeah, go ahead.
They had that they showed that in the South. There was at least one of the generals or officers. Anyways, and maybe it's just a colonel maybe, but he was one of the guys who was there. He was a politician, and he was just basically in this position to try to like get some to check military leader off on his credential list. He was willing to listen to his superiors and do exactly what they told him to do, so they were more than willing to just let him be. So I imagine the North had a similar group of people, and this general sounds like exactly one.
Yeah, General Sickles. Yeah, I haven't heard any. Of all the historical stuff I've watched, mostly documentaries, but read some things. Like, nobody says anything positive about him.
Well, but if you want military experience, Chamberlain doesn't have military experience either. On the other hand,
yeah, that's a good point.
He manages to do stuff that's still taught in West Point to this day as fine military leadership. So
yeah, that's true.
I mean,
yeah,
but on the other hand, it could also help the fact of, I mean, they go into what happened to the people afterwards. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that because they show what happened to just about everybody after this, and Chamberlain's was very interesting. But anyways.
Yeah, I do like how this movie, it doesn't just show smart moves that people make. It shows mistakes. And I think that's one of the great things that I liked about this movie, and why I even like showing it to kids, which obviously people have to make their own decision on what's age appropriate, but because it shows people messing up and what happens. I really love the scene where Jeb Stuart gets like reprimanded from Lee. But there are a few things, like Sickles' mistake is kind of brushed over, which I get. You can't cover everything. There's another mistake the South made on the second day, which is General Lee's march up to Little Round Top. Apparently there were some problems where they weren't able to, like, where they were going and which direction they were going. There was some confusion about that. And General Longstreet was actually blamed for years after this for failing to attack the hill correctly. And they kind of they throw all of that into a line where General Lee says the attacks were not properly coordinated. I just don't know why. He says like that, like, yeah.
Well, it's yet again one of those, like, people will often cover for their favorites. And
Yeah,
it's what's agreed by a lot of people is that Lee was a really good coordinator, and also he knew everybody, right? He knew everybody who was in both sides of just about every officer. You'll note that in the movie where he's like, I know this person, because he knows everybody. Like he's brushed shoulders with every military person in the entire U.S. military up to that point, and then when the Civil War started, he knew what kind of a person they were and what kind of fighting style they had, and that was very useful going into this. But as for his individual capabilities and tactics, when we get into day 3, that's where it starts to really show that he is making some, let's say, less than optimal decisions.
Yeah, I think we kind of talked about this a little bit before, but like we said, this movie does tend to focus more on the Confederate characters rather than the Union characters, but one thing I will say in defense of this movie as far as that goes is that while it does kind of give Lee a certain, what's the word, a certain high level of charisma, to use nerd terms, shall we say. He has high charisma, but they also don't shy away from the fact that, how to phrase this, so shall we say for quite a long time, and to kind of bring up what you said, what some said before, I forget who said, about how they do little things at the end to talk about what happens to the characters after the people after the battle. And in Lee's thing, they say that, oh well, Lee's gone on to become one of the most beloved generals of the U.S. And at the time, that was probably true. I feel like that's one of the things that's been changed in modern zeitgeist.
I think that
multiple reasons. Obviously, there's the fact that he was fighting on the side of the Confederacy, and the Confederacy had some, let's say, questionable choices that they've made. But they even reference that in the movie. The Longstreet talks about that because England. England has a representative there observing things on the Confederate side, because England.
Well, technically, he wasn't actually a representative, but he was there on vacation.
Yeah,
technically, but anyway, go ahead.
But still,
it's not important.
He was a military commander from England. He could have some conversations with important people when he got back to England, and so they were trying to give him a good idea of what's going on. But England and most of Europe was very hesitant to trade with the South for very obvious reasons, because they had given up the institution of slavery, and Longstreet had said in the movie that they should have started the war just doing that, and then it would have been just down to that one question of states' rights versus federal rights, because the North had the moral high ground, and in reality the real high ground in this particular battle. But in the war, they had the moral high ground because they had made this particular decision that they were opposed to, and they tried to. They were it's not they were trying to. They were making the entire point of the war about slavery, whereas the South was trying to say it's states' rights versus federal rights, which is a little bit more confusing and a little bit. It's kind of Yeah,
I was going to say, is this the dangerous ground you want to dance in, sort of the lost cause history against actual history?
Well,
I think people have already talked and debated about it. I don't think we need to go into big detail unless one of you wants to.
Spicy take. Slavery is a bad thing. I know that's a real spicy
yes,
take
obviously.
Right, and also the Confederates. The Confederates did actually have a document or a charter. What is it called? Oh, I really should know these things.
Oh, I suppose the more quote-unquote spicy take is that the Civil War was about states' rights rather than slavery.
Yeah, and that's the North had very much made it about slavery, which is why they were winning on a moral ground, and why England and other European powers were not willing to step in, is because the South had held on to that particular institution. If they'd given it up to start with, or if they'd given it up in the middle of the war, at any moment the European powers probably would have stepped in, and it would have been a very different history book that we're reading at this
maybe time. It's hard to really say for sure what would have happened.
To be fair, I think As a historian on the internet that I watched phrase it, I guess you could argue it was about states' rights, but what was the right the South was trying to hang on to against northern states? Slavery.
Slavery.
Yeah. Yeah, and they write about it, openly talk about it. And I think it's even in their official documents they will put in, like, this is the grievance we have. We have this right, and we feel like this president, Abraham Lincoln, is going to take it from us, which their paranoia is not completely unfounded. He was against slavery, and there were a lot of people in the North that were trying to take it away. But I think this is me talking now, but I think that probably the number one reason why these people fought each other is just because there was a war and there was a declaration, and they had, in their mind, they were just more loyal to their local state and the local community than they were to the whole idea of the country. And to us today, people move from state to state. They might live in 5 or 6 states through their lifetime. I mean, they were born in one side of the country, they live in another place, they go travel internationally for a little while, and then they come back. I mean, this is a mobile time that we're living in. But in 1860, like, it wasn't too uncommon for you to be born and then die in that same region. And if you did go for another state, that was a big deal. You were moving yourself through a long, treacherous journey where you might die of sickness, where you were, burning a lot of calories moving across
Jeff,
on a wagon.
The train, ever since the invention of the train and people were moving around.
Yeah, people did have trains at this time, true.
That actually is not quite as true, but admittedly, the entire concept of the train was still in its infancy at the time. So I'll give you that, where it was not observed to be the common thing to do, to move beyond your immediate region. So people
like
identified with their own area a lot more. I'll give you that, where people say, I identify with this region more than I identify with the country as a whole. So,
yeah, and so when it comes down to it, people went to war because it's a war. People tend to view their people versus those people, and so they'll fight for whoever they think is part of their community and their ideology. And there was a guy I listened to for a while that said something interesting. He said that and I don't know if this is true or not, but it's kind of more theoretical, but the reason why people go to war and have done it for thousands of years is because the people who go to war, it doesn't make sense for them to do all this and to do all this long-term travel and all this danger, but the people who go to war and come back, there's notoriety to it. They've gone somewhere and done something for the community, and when they come back, women are more likely to pay attention to them. They're more likely for the other men in the community to hold them in respect. So there's some sort of gain that they get from that, and I think that there's some sort of impulse that people have, which is what I'm trying to say. Like, when this war started and people in South Carolina learned there was a war, they were like, oh, we're fighting? Sign me up. I gotta go, and whatever the reasons are don't matter. The point is there's conflict, and anybody who has a conflict with my community, I'm gonna fight them. I think that's the mentality. The politics were busy within the upper level people, the politicians, the rich people, but most poor people don't think about politics extensively, and they just signed up because the war was there and they were going to fight it. But I don't know, go ahead.
So dragging ourselves out of this particular tangent and back to it, we were talking a little bit about Little Round Top.
Yeah.
Right? And things get really spicy and dramatic in this particular battle. It's Jeff, you talked about how you really like to go into the particulars of the movements. What happens in this battle that's particularly interesting from
in the Little
a
Round
positioning and movement perspective?
So Sickles leaves Little Round Top. He leaves it. He goes forward, gets himself basically running right where the Confederates can surround him and attack him. So that's bad. And then there was a guy, his last name is Warren, I think. He goes up in Little Round Top, and he looks out, and his job as an engineer, it's to like to position armies and stuff like that. But he looks out and he sees Sickle way out there in trouble. He sees that the Confederates are coming around, and they're going to attack Little Round Top. And so basically it's just him and a few people on the hill. So he knows this is a hole in the line, and it's got to be plugged. We need somebody to be on this hill when the Confederates arrive. So he scrambles to send a message, and that message gets given to a rider who rides down to tell the leader to go up the chain of command. It so happens one of the Corps commanders comes out, intercepts him. He sees this courier coming and is like, "Hey, you got a message? I just want to read it because I'm nosy. I want to know what you know." And it turns out it's an order. It's a desperate plea. Please come to Little Round Top and save this part of the line. And he's like, well, I got a whole bunch of troops with me. I'll just make the decision and I'll go up the hill. And so that's where the 20th Maine comes from. It's one of those regiments in that group. And so they go and they line themselves up on Little Round Top. But Little Round Top has got a big open field on one side and wooded area facing Big Round Top, which the names of these hills weren't named at this time, but so they line up so that like the southern side of the hill is shielded, which is the area they're more likely to approach from. And the Confederates go on to Big Round Top. They're on top of that hill. The General Lee said, don't go up on that hill. Well, some of them still did. And they go up on that hill, and they're up there, and Hood tells them, you have to go and attack Little Round Top. That's the spot where we're going to break the Union line. So they come down off the hill and come down, and these guys, at this point...
just going to interject a quick fact check really quick. So,
go ahead.
So I'm looking at a map of Wikipedia. It looks like Sickles wasn't on Little Round Top itself. He was part of the line on Cemetery Ridge that flanked Little Round Top. So
I'm a little bit more general, yeah. But he was around that gap that opened up, and the Little Round Top is part of it. They do move a little bit south, because Little Round Top is a little bit on the flank. That's true. But the point is Sickle has opened this giant gap in the line.
Instead of just...
So we get to Chamberlain's the 20th, the Maine 20th, and Chamberlain
Gonna throw that. Oh, no, that just brings up the Wikipedia article.
Okay, but anyway, yeah, Chamberlain is positioned so he's on the far left of the hill. You've got these four regiments together in a line.
If you go to that Wikipedia article, they'll show the map.
Okay.
But yeah, they're all four of them in a line. There's only 4 regiments, and so there's 5 Confederate regiments, and they come and attack this line. And Chamberlain, being on the edge, if he leaves, that means that they'll go around the flank. But technically, they do make it dramatic in the moment. Like, if you leave, the whole line will collapse. Well, anybody leaves in the line, it'll probably collapse. Like, the center gives, they'll collapse. If the other side gives, they'll collapse. But he is on the extreme left of the whole fishhook Union line, the whole thing. So he knows he cannot leave unless somebody comes to relieve him. But these Confederates, they actually ran out of water, interesting enough. They were woken up at 3 a.m. to start their march for that day. And then they walk all through the dark of the night. They walk through the day. They send people with their canteens to go find water. They never come back. So they have had no water for all through the heat of this day. And now they have to, and they just went through a whole bunch of battles through what's called Devil's Den, this terrible battle in which a bunch of other Union guys tried to run out to save Sickle, because Sickle's being surrounded. A bunch of people run out to save Sickle, and they get caught in all these battles around a peach orchard, which later calls Devil's Den, these different areas around the hill. So they're all fighting, and the Union army is breaking. and they're retreating. They're taking terrible losses. And so the 20th Maine is plopped. There's another line forms right on time, and the Union is lucky. I don't see my point of view, everything I hear about, it's not that the Union are incredibly great planners. They just are very lucky that they were able to respond this quickly, that courier was intercepted by somebody who had the authority to put soldiers on that hill very quickly.
Well,
and there's a little bit of good luck and a little bit of bad luck from the Confederates.
Well, it's more like you roll the dice enough times and eventually your number is going to come up. And in this particular case, the Union had finally gotten a good roll at exactly the moment they needed it to happen. In this particular case, it was the 20th Maine and Chamberlain got stuck in this spot, and they happened to be in an okay spot to defend against. I mean, it was a wooded area which blocks the line of sight. It reduces the amount of line of sight you've got, but on the other hand, it's difficult to move through as a formation. So the Southerners were not able to attack in as much force as they wanted to. So this small force was able to hold reasonably well, but it still took a lot.
It did. They had to make several quick decisions too, because they kept trying to go further and further around to the side, because they want to do the flanking action where you have enemies from one direction and another direction, like at the same time.
Yeah.
So they had to turn their line at an angle.
He builds basically a siege work made out of bodies and guns, and he turns it into a very strong defensive line that has multiple angles of interlocking fire, and it's those right angles that he does that make it very difficult for them, because if they want to attack any particular front of that particular line, they have to go through. They're not only getting shot from the front, but they're also getting shot from the side, which is very difficult to deal with.
Yeah, and I also have learned that it isn't normal to run out of ammunition in the Civil War. The Civil War battles, usually they would get together, fire volleys, but running out of ammo was unique to them because they can only fire 3 shots a minute. But the battles usually didn't last long enough for them to shoot all their ammunition off. That's like, as guns become more advanced in later generations, it's very easy to run out of ammo. But still, this is the time of slower reloads, and so they go into the battle thinking they have plenty of ammunition, and it turns out they just do not, because they have to stay for so long and keep going.
So they
actually run out.
They start with a full battle load. 60 rounds sounds like nothing, you're right. But they have a full battle round, and that, you're right, that was more than enough for any reasonable battle, but this was not a reasonable battle for them.
Yeah.
But it ends with what is noted as being a cute. The general that's looking at this at Chamberlain after this is like, you ordered a bayonet charge, and it gets a smile on his face like, oh, that's cute. And he's like, Chamberlain looks at him like, yeah, I did, because it was all I had left at the time. And the person thought it was just kind of like kind of being silly, but when the actual report gets in afterwards, it's like, no, that's he had nothing left. There was no bullets. There was no, like, he had nothing left. He could stay there and die. He could. They said it in the movie. His line was, I can stay here and die. I can leave and the army will collapse, or I could charge and maybe win. So let's go door number 3.
So, fun fact, if I remember my history correctly, you know the scene where Chamberlain has run down the hill and he comes across he has the little standoff with the Confederate officer that has a revolver that doesn't go off? Mm-hmm. That actually happened. I can't remember if the gun just misfired or if the gun was empty, but that actually happened.
Yep. It's one of those history is far stranger than fiction will ever let it be, or fiction could ever write. So
Anyway, yeah, it that comes from his account. Um, and some people disagree with Chamberlain's account that he didn't order the charge. I bet everything that was happening was so chaotic. It's probably hard to really know, or anyone to really know what was going on. So I kind of like take that. You have to take it with a grain of salt, as the expression goes. He might have easily ordered it, and maybe one of his commanders didn't know that it was happening. But then when the colors moved down the hill, they were like, "All right, let's go." Yeah, it's hard to really know.
I'm on the Wikipedia article right now, and quote, while Chamberlain ordered the advance, Lieutenant Holman Mector spontaneously and separate to Chamberlain's command initiated a charge from the center that further aided the regiment's efforts. So just by chance, at the same time, another commander did the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he wins. He defeats the Confederates at that particular position. He
keeps going too. They go all the way down Little Round Top, and then they go all the way up to Big Round Top. They actually go up over the next hill. It's an enormous amount of charge of ground that they're charging into. They just keep going and going. And in that movie, I don't know if they fully show it. They show them going down to the hill and kind of stopping. But they actually went down the hill, kept going, kept chasing them all the way up over another hill. And anyway, so they're actually on Big Round Top at the end. And they managed to capture a lot of prisoners.
That was one thing that they showed it in the movie. That was one thing that they were very... People had to understand that people had to be treated decently because these were their fellow countrymen. Both sides were very gentle with prisoners, or at least they tried to be gentle with prisoners.
Andersonville.
Yeah.
I guess that depends on the situation. Yeah. I feel like when people become prisoners, it depends on who you're surrendering to and how they feel in the moment, how desperate they are, and whether there's officers around to kind of like control everyone and keep the situation under control. There's a lot of different factors.
Well, you know, it's one of those things is like there were probably, at least a lot of the infantrymen had been told that prisoners, I mean, I imagine the way they would have done it is they probably would have said, hey, you know, you take prisoners, you be gentle to them, and we'll get you something good for doing the right thing. Historically, previous to this, especially officers were valuable. Like in wars, not this war. In wars, not this war, right? Officers were useful because they could be ransomed back to their home countries. They could be, you know, you give us, because officers would typically come from the gentry, so they'd be useful for ransoms purposes. And then also the enlisted would be like, well, you know, they're only fighting because they're getting paid, so, you know, we put them in a camp, and then eventually they might be on our side because, you know, reasons, because we pay as well as they do, so whatever. Mistreatment of military prisoners has always been a interesting topic. It's modern era has changed things a lot, but historically it's always been a very specific.
Well, yeah, and so they capture all these prisoners, and yeah, they show the aftermath of this, which is they show the Civil War hospital, which is nowhere where anyone would want to ever be, and I think it's good because a lot of this show is shown in a lot of schools, and I do think that it's good to show how these people went into this because, you know, they signed up, they joined this conflict, and this is the result that many of them got left with. Just the agony and all the misery that they now have as they're just lying about in this hospital, just totally beaten up and traumatized from what happened. there's a lot of people that you could see them on carts. They're just like mentally gone. They show that as well. So it's about as graphic as you can get and still keep the show PG-13-ish.
Yeah, because in the time, obviously they talk about it where a person will lose a limb and they might not make it, even after they cut the limb off, because they didn't have the medical technology. They didn't even. So one of the most important medical advances still wasn't out yet, which was penicillin.
But also like clean your, like sanitation itself.
Well,
like clean your tools.
Sanitation, they kind of understood it, but it was one of those they didn't have the resources to do it. Like high officers, like generals and whatnot, would have their own personal physicians, right? Just in case.
Yeah, they'd have their own doctors.
Personal physician would have his own personal tools. So, like Lee or Longstreet or someone else gets wounded, they're not going to be treated by your common physician. They're going to be treated by the personal physician, and you have a much better chance of surviving because they understood the concept of sanitary at the time, just they didn't have the resources to do it. They didn't quite understand how vitally important it was, but they understood that it made things better.
Yeah, I was going to say, to be fair, I think we might be trending into the realm of, those poor dumb people in the past who didn't know how to do medicine. They were doing the best they could at the time, and yes, they did do a lot of amputations, but a lot of those people also lived as compared to before they would have died.
And also,
these were different kinds of amputations. The actual like bullets they were firing, they were so large and heavy, and the speeds they were going at, the injuries they created, there wasn't a way for them to actually reconstruct and put all those bones together and to do some sort of reconstructive surgery to save their limbs. There was a lot of times those bones were so shattered, there's nothing they could have done. It never would have healed. So
and
they're left with that difficult situation.
And we have, like, on a modern battlefield, a soldier is never more than, like, I know the calculations. It's something like half an hour to an hour away from a top tier surgical suite, right? And this is modern battlefields versus at the time. There's a barn over yonder that we might be able to get you to sometime a few hours from now, because it's the middle of a battle. They can't drag a person to that. You know what I mean, right? The best they had was a barn, which maybe had fresh hay, which was the height of sanitary the conditions that they had available at the time, right? Obviously the general in his private physician would actually have the farmhouse, and it'd have the farmhouse table, the dinner table in the farmhouse, and that would be his surgical suite, and he'd obviously have to stand a much better chance. But still, neither one of those that's horrifying according to modern medical standards. But it's what they have.
They didn't have a medical evacuation helicopter to whisk someone away to a field hospital to stabilize them so they could fly to a major military hospital in a different country.
Yeah. No.
Now enter the episode of MASH.
Jeff, you have a point there with MASH. It's that they had the barn and they had the farmhouse and that's about it for medical capabilities.
Well, and there was a lot of people that probably couldn't be evacuated. They're in the middle of what you might call no man's land.
If you were
which was
lucky,
later a term. Yeah.
If you were lucky, you had friends that could drag you back, but most likely you'd have to drag yourself to some sort of care. And
they show that in the during Pickett's charge. They show a lot of people who they're limping back. They have to get back somehow, all on their own, across that enormous field. That's a long journey.
Either that or they surrender themselves to the North, and then they're put at literally the end of the waiting list for care. So, yeah.
Yeah, not a great situation. Because even if they make it all the way back to the Confederate lines, it's still going to be difficult, and then they're going to have to endure the wagon ride home, which is going to be in haste because they had to evacuate after the third day.
I've been on a simulated wagon ride. It's slow and it's uncomfortable, and I could just imagine
bumpy.
being wounded at the time. If you can walk, you walked.
Wagons don't have shock absorbers.
Yeah, they don't.
Well, some wagons did, but I don't know how effective they would be on a dirt road, really, even if they had some sort of shocks.
They talk about the Chamberlain, Jeff Daniels' character, doesn't like riding horses, and I don't blame him. I've done the whole horse/mule ride, and it is not comfortable.
It's like being
really
bounced
have to have
for so long.
all the secrets to it to understand how to do it even remotely comfortably. But most of the time, you're just kind of fooling yourself that it's comfortable, and you're just trying to save yourself from the walk and maybe move marginally faster.
I've gone horseback riding a couple of times. Granted, it's been quite a few decades. I don't remember it being that uncomfortable at the time, but then again, like I said, that was a long time ago, and it was for like an afternoon. It wasn't like a day. It wasn't like a whole day thing. It was a couple of hours.
There's a common joke that the Common Cavalry Manual is written by it's called 40 Days in the Saddle by Major no, that's a crude term. Sorry, I'm trying to think of the less crude term. Major tail problems or something like that. But you get the idea where a person has major discomfort in the butt region. But that's the name of the guy who wrote the book. But anyways, yeah, it's even cavalry people have issue with having to ride for that long of a period of time. And yeah, so walking,
well, you can develop sores from if you ride on a horse for too long.
Yes,
you can develop sores on your legs and your backside, and it's very uncomfortable. Yeah.
But anyways, so they get through this battle. They get through day 2. And now they're into day 3, and Lee has an idea. What's Lee's grand idea?
Now, I will say, the first time I watched this movie, this did teach me something, because for all you hear about Pickett's charge, I was under the understanding that it was an accident, like it wasn't supposed to happen the way it went down. But nope, that was the plan.
It just wasn't a plan that was feasible, but it was the plan.
I mean, he lists his logic, but Longstreet and his fellow officers are saying this is a stupid idea. But Lee has the logic of, we've hit them on the flanks, they've reinforced the flanks, they reinforced the flanks with something. Presumably they pulled this people out of the center to reinforce the flanks, so we hit the center, we can break them into 2 pockets and defeat them in detail.
It sounds very Napoleonic. Like you go in and you hit them and divide them in pieces. But it makes you wonder what they were thinking. I think that overconfidence is a big thing that armies sometimes get into. They have these great victories, and as much as those victories might give them a head, I think psychologically there can be a downside to it, because now they don't have evidence that they can make mistakes.
You could very easily win every battle in an entire war and still lose.
But those victories, though, when you have a victory, it's like a sports team. They win 10 games in a row, and now they're like, look how awesome we are. Let's goof around at practice. And I'm not saying the Confederates did that, but what I'm saying is, like, this, when they got to Gettysburg, they really felt like they were an amazing army. And in the movie, Lee says that in the end. It's like, I thought we were invisible. Not invisible. Invincible.
Well,
invincible.
You look right before. If you look right before Pickett's charge, what happens to Lee? Right, he rides out to the lines, and what happens to him?
Yeah, everyone walks out and cheers, and it's this
they're all trying to touch him
heroic
like
music
he's
is
some
playing.
sort of messianic figure to them. And
Yeah.
that's maybe he was starting to like really believe in that, and that's not very unreasonable to think that he would start to believe in this fact that he's this great military mind, and there's no way he could make this mistake. There's no way he could make a mistake, and he's starting to say, "Hey, we're gonna win this fight because I've got this general. I've got this General Meade figured out. I know exactly what's happening with this Union army. We're gonna hit them really hard and defeat them in detail right now. They've stretched themselves too thin. They can't be strong everywhere, and if we concentrate on one point, we'll do it." And
What's interesting about that scene where those Confederate soldiers come out to greet Lee? None of that is acting. I mean, they are reenactors and they're playing that part. But when they come out there and cheer, I mean, there is a part of them that just is enthusiastic about the of General Lee and all that history and his greatness. But yeah, you're right. People felt that strongly about him. I'm glad that they included the scene. Just it was an accident in filming. They hadn't staged that together. It just kind of happened on set, and so they filmed it.
Well, they had in real life. Martin Sheen was a very famous actor, very, very well regarded at the time. So I don't doubt that was a kind of an unscripted moment, and all they would have had to do is say, instead of shout Martin Sheen, shout General Lee, which is kind of close, and then you're going like, oh yeah, or dub it in and fix it in post, and then everybody's like, cheering this guy on, and he's the dude on the horse that's dressed fancy. Let's cheer him on, and whatnot.
Well, I don't know if you want to call it unscripted, because back in the day when, you're kind of actual film in it, you didn't waste film by just kind of pointing off in the direction just for fun and see what happens.
Yeah, this was probably
not to contradict Jeff, but just saying.
I get where there might have been some cheering happening. BJ, have you guys talked about Lord of the Rings?
Have we talked about it
in the podcast?
Not publicly.
Not like as an episode, but
so do you mind if I do a spoiler for Lord of the Rings?
Do a spoiler from a no wait, I don't from a it hurts to say this, spoil a 20-year-old movie? No.
So there's a part in Lord of the Rings.
Years ago, that sucks.
There's a part in Lord of the Rings where the orcs start to thump the ground, right? Well, that was quote-unquote unscripted, because the extras that they had playing orcs actually did that because they were cold. And they would do it in sequence because they came from the local areas, and a lot of them, I think it's New Zealand, a lot of the locals there, Maori tribesmen were like just, they liked to do things as a group, so they would all start hitting the ground in unison, just because they were cold and they were trying to move around. They have
traditional. They also have traditional dances, war dances.
No, but they were still doing something together as a group, right? Well, yeah, that was a quote unquote unscripted thing, and the director saw that and was like, "Okay, get a camera, get that here, get that. This is perfect. This is film gold," and they would do that. And so I imagine every time Martin Sheen rode out as General Lee, the soldiers would all get really excited, and they'd be like, "Yeah, hey, I want to greet this guy," and probably security would have to hold them back. But then the director of the movie was like, "Get security out of here. Let the soldiers get in. They're probably not going to be mistreating Mr. Martin Sheen. Just let this happen. Because this is what I want. This is the shot I want."
Yeah.
So, yeah, there can be a way where it can be unscripted and scripted at the same time. So,
well, regardless,
I was going to say anyway.
Well, there's one more thing I wanted to say. Okay, yeah, we don't know. But here's the thing. Anyway. Can I just say this is a rant that I usually have about people, but I think that somehow in human nature, and all people are like this, we are somehow drawn to some sort of ideal for leaders. like if you look at history, people loved Caesar. People loved Napoleon. They loved the king in that famous battle. People,
That one king in that one battle.
yeah, that one king in the one battle, you know, they love the idea of some sort of superhero that's leading them. And I get why humans are drawn to that kind of thing, but there's a point where you have to sit back and really look at things as they are, and that is that human beings are not flawless. And I think one of the problems is that when you make a human being into some sort of flawless superhero like General Lee, what happens is that people are eventually, they're going to set themselves up for their expectations to eventually be broken.
So
Because-
what you're saying is that the people will start to believe so much that they'll charge 15,000 people into a well-defended area and they'll just get slaughtered?
Yeah, I guess so. But also, on top of that, I don't think it's fair. This whole situation is asking a lot of General Lee. They make him in charge of the army. They ask him to defeat the North. He's outnumbered. He doesn't have enough supplies, enough cannon. You know, politically, it's a difficult situation because even though the North has a lot of political follow-through, they go years and years into this war. And they don't seem to quit. He's completely outmatched. And despite that, he has these tremendous battles where he beats the North time and time again. And what the people expect of Lee is to keep on being perfect. Now go to Gettysburg and don't make any mistakes. Oh, and you don't have any cavalry to help you know where the Union are. But hey, you can't make mistakes. You have to make decisions. And yes, you don't like disengaging from the battlefield, but so you have to fight and you have to make these decisions and don't accidentally lose it at this point. And human beings can't be flawless forever. If you expect them to never make mistakes, they're going to go on for years with really great performance, but eventually it's going to come down to the fact that they're human and they're going to make mistakes. And I think the problem is the South was relying upon perfect leadership, and you can't always rely upon it. Eventually, they're going to mess up.
Well, to be
And so
fair,
that's now we have Pickett's charge.
To be fair, Lee was kind of helped out by a rotating door of Union generals until you hit Grant, and then Grant.
Yeah. So the other side was
then Grant did his thing, and we saw how that went.
Well, even Meade was starting to bark
Yeah.
up the right tree towards the middle.
Yeah.
Even at this point of his leadership, he was starting to bark up the right tree.
Yeah,
So-
Meade historically gets kind of a bad rap because he didn't pursue Lee after Battle of Gettysburg. It's like, yeah, it was just after the Battle of Gettysburg. What was he going to pursue him with?
And Meade has a few other problems, but we won't go.
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
that. So yeah, the Pickett's charge happens, and Pickett comes back. The actor does a really great job. Stephen Lang comes back and says, Lee's like, hey, get your people formed back up. We need to set to defend. And Pickett's like, I don't have a division left. It's dead.
Lee, I don't have a division.
He does a
numbers.
stellar performance at that point, where it's just like you show a man who's just completely shattered because he's seen everything that he's known and loved just die, just be fed right into a meat grinder that is, and it's all that's left afterwards is a shattered remnant that is dead and dying.
Yeah, there's a couple of good scenes in there. Like there's the scene with General Armistead. So technically, that I don't know if it was the last scene they filmed, but that was probably that's probably that actor. What was his name? Richard Jordan. That was his last scene on the film because before Gettysburg came out, he died of brain cancer. So that was his last scene to be on film.
Yeah, he was sick during the filming of this movie. His health was really bad.
Yeah, he was.
And
he
my
was pretty
wife,
much dying of kind of cancer at the time.
and my wife asked me about that because she's like, why are these people going on about that? And I'm like, I actually compared it to us, and she got that, where these three people, two of them were generals in this particular war, in this particular battle on this particular side, and then one was a general on the South for the South, and they were three very good friends, and they were fighting against each other.
Yeah, a lot of these guys had gone to West Point together. A lot of these guys had fought in the Mexican War together.
And my wife was like, why are they going on and on? And I'm like, well, I compared it to our friendship, how close we had stayed as friends for so very long, and then because of personal decisions, now they're facing off against each other. They didn't think that they were going to face off. They thought, all of them thought that the war would be long over before they had to face each other personally. But
yeah, they all thought it would be over quickly, and then years go by, and they're in this situation.
And they don't want to. They don't want to actually be the person who pulls the trigger to kill their best friend, or even send a regiment to. So they're all three of them are kind of like, oh gosh, I'm being put in a rough situation here. But they stay the course, obviously, and whatnot. So,
in the moment, General Armistead, he's shot on the battlefield, and people rush to talk with him because he's a general. They notice how important he is, and he's like, he says, "Can you get me to General Hancock?" And they say, no, he's been shot as well. I mean, all of that, from my understanding, really happened. He wanted to talk with his friend, but never got a chance to.
Mm-hmm.
It's really great that they spend so much time on this relationship that they had in the movie, because I think it really personifies a lot about the Civil War. That these were people that they were politically divided, but they were also very much friends and had a strong bond together.
You literally had friends and family fighting each other because they were on the opposite ends of the particular situations that were causing this war to happen. Especially in like border states, but there were some families that were a little bit in spread out across the entire country, and you ended up having like, okay, this brother, he was living in Tennessee, and this other brother, he was living in like New York, and oh shoot, now they're fighting against each other because reasons.
There was only so many military officers at the beginning of this war. There wasn't a lot of them. The United States didn't have a large military, so it was a small group, and many of them knew each other well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's just such a strange war, and this is even just such a unique battle of different people that were involved.
But the North wins this battle, and this is one of the big turning points in the entire war, because it shows it's a necessary victory at the time for the North. It's like because up until now, well, it's not up until now the South had always been winning, because I think there was Antietam was before this, right?
Yeah, and Antietam didn't really have a conclusive anything to it. Both sides just got terribly
both sides devastated. Just mauled each other until everybody just decided to stop fighting because nobody
and the Confederates left. Yeah.
Battle of Antietam was in September of 62.
But this one was the first very clear-cut victory for the North. They were able to point to this and say, hey, we've got a major victory under our belts. And
well, to kind of defend the General Lee at the Pickett's charge a little bit, their plan was to move the soldiers off the middle of the ground. They weren't planning to charge it while everyone was in their position ready to fire on them. They were going to shoot at them with a massive amount of cannons, and they were going to get those people to run away so that they could actually move into a position that was cleared already. That was their plan. But the problem was they never managed to achieve that. And so they eventually had to send in the infantry without with just because they have to follow orders. They have to continue the attack. I think there's a lot of theme in here. Like Buford says that in one of his early speeches. It's like he knows they'll get into a situation where they have an order to attack, even though it's a terrible order, but they have to follow it. And then the Confederates are the ones later on, they're in that same situation. They have these orders. They know that it's probably a bad idea, but they have to do it. Anyway.
Kind of fact checking and talk about some other things. I guess you could argue that Gettysburg was the first great Union victory in the East. I will say that in the Western theater of the American Civil War, Grant had won the Battle of Shiloh in April of '62. So Grant was getting things done in the West, but in the East, I guess you could say that that Gettysburg was one of the first great victories of the Union, and I guess politically that was more important since that was right on the doorstep of the Capitol.
Yes.
And I could be wrong, but I do believe that the exchange of artillery fire during the charge, I believe that remains the largest artillery battle in North American history.
And you get to see this really awesome recreation of it in the movie, where they got real cannons, and they all fired them up in line, just like as they would have back then. And the scene you see in the movie is really good. It's incredible. I do like it. And they also used a robotic, it's one of the first drone filming things that they ever did. I don't know if you'd call it a drone, but they did have a remotely controlled aircraft that flew over those cannons and filmed them together. And it just looks really great, I think.
It is a good shot. They use it more than once, I think. There's a few times where in the movie you can see they to nitpick. I'm being pedantic or nitpicky right here, where there's a few times where you can see in the movie where they use the same battle shot over at least twice, if not three times. So
yeah, there was go ahead.
But no, they do that a few times, and it's like, okay. You can. Yeah. It takes a bit of noticing, but if you do, you're like, oh, that's gonna bug me.
Yeah, there's one thing I noticed. It was a cannon shot. It shows like a guy it's like a panning shot going past a cannon, and like at the front it shows a guy like throwing down the ramrod, and it gets to the end and they fire the cannon. They do that 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
Can I just say what? Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, that's just to be a bit nitpicky, because it is a very dramatic shot, and I can see why they would want to, because in reality, there's only so many ways that you can show a line of cannons firing. It's
one of the things that that this movie gets as far as criticism is that a lot of the people in it are not the right age, because in order to make this movie work, they had to rely on reenactors. And in a way, I think that this movie is more like the ultimate Civil War reenactment. Because people go to these Civil War reenactment events where you go and you actually watch people and they march across the field and they shoot at each other and they play out a moment in history as a live performance. And this movie is the ultimate of that in a way, because you have all these real history reenactors. They're not the right age, a lot of them, but they have enthusiasm for it, and they show up with their own costumes that they made.
And a lot of that is I've seen that be both said as a criticism and yet also as a compliment, because a lot of these people put a lot more passion into this than most Hollywood actors would put into it, because these people, this is their passion. They you're right. They made their own costumes and they put every ounce of effort that they could into making these things exactly the way that it was at the time. They probably studied up a lot of these people. This is their family history, so they probably studied in detail pictures of their ancestors who went to war, and they're like, okay, I want to make this look exactly like my ancestor looked at the time, because this is their heritage. They really wanted to fulfill that element of their heritage, to feel in play, to touch and feel their own roots and understand it at a fundamental level.
And even though you don't see their tents as much, a lot of them had they camped. They had tents and they cooked with Civil War like tools, pots and pans and different things. They're historical enthusiasts. When they did this filming, it was like a whole journey for them. They traveled to the real place where the battle happened. They lived in the Civil War type of environment to some extent. They probably had still, bathrooms available or something. It wasn't completely authentic, but still, I think that this movie has a special place because not very many films are made like that by people who really loved the history, and they came, and during the production of this, they were very much it was an experience for them to immerse themselves into that time period. Yeah.
No, it's a good observation. It's they were able to do this, and for better or worse, they were able to get all these people. I can't remember. BJ, do you know if how much they were paid, or if they were paid like legit rates, or if these people were pretty much volunteers? I can't remember.
No idea.
No idea?
I think most of them were not paid. I'm pretty sure they were not paid anything. They were all different groups, and they just said, "Hey, could you come, and could you bring all your stuff, and we'll have this plan set out, and we'll do Pickett's charge." And yeah, they had to really time everything perfectly. But there were some extras that they put in costumes and different things. But I think most of them were reenactors, both the Union and the Confederates.
The very minimum, they gave them craft services. That's a joke. Well, probably not a joke. They probably at least fed the guys. But
the Wikipedia article didn't say anything about it, and I didn't have time to watch like the special features on the Blu-ray, so no idea.
Yeah, I'm
fact check failed.
It's okay. It's not. It's only one of those little minor details, but still, it's one of those things.
No, I'm pretty sure they did not get paid. I will publicly make that. I did watch the making of, and it's been a little while though. I don't think there was any kind of compensation for them at all. This was just an opportunity to do what they love to do. To be on camera in a big movie.
To be a part of the visual history of this particular moment.
Yeah, because these people do perform. They get together and they do performances. And there's lots of them all over the country. They just got them all together. Yeah. It took years to make this movie.
Because they're Civil War nerds. And as my wife says, it's nothing... You pay, nobody gets more passionate about something than a nerd. And if a person's a nerd about a Civil War, he's going to be very passionate about the Civil War. When you guys get, when the audience gets to Dune, you're going to find out how much of a Dune nerd I am. Maybe not as much as these Civil War reenactors, but still, I'm a pretty big Dune nerd. But then, nobody gets more passionate about something than a nerd. So these guys are like very passionate about this particular moment. So
I'm trying to find information just so I have the chance to prove Jeff wrong again, but I'm not finding anything. One way or the other.
If only you had another chance. Another chance. Oh, the moment that whole AU versus whatever it was, like parsec or something, we had this big discussion about measurements. As soon as that happened, you're like now hunting the white whale. You're on...
I don't have to hunt it. I already got the white whale. It's stuffed and mounted on my wall.
Oh my goodness.
I got the first shot.
You're obsessed, BJ.
Let's go for bonus points.
We need an intervention. BJ is obsessed. Obsessed with discovering where I will next make a folly.
It's... Oh, come on, guys. Anyways,
Oh.
so not to make this last forever.
It can last
Too
forever.
late.
We can just keep going. Nobody will stop us.
Guys, I've got garbage tots waiting for me at the other end of this podcast, so I kind of want to get these things wrapped up. So
Garbage tots? What?
Gary,
What are we talking about?
Okay. Let me go off on the tangent of garbage tots because it's amazing.
Gary has a
and
life
you guys
to get
need
to.
eat it. Garbage tots are tater tots smothered in cheese with meats and sauces. In this particular case, I'm hoping, and my wife's behind me, I'm pretty sure she's going to be making something with chicken, maybe, hopefully buffalo chicken, but that's only a cross by fingers because she does an amazing job at making that. So yeah, just imagine tater tots cooked to perfection, smothered in cheese and buffalo chicken, and you're
all of that
right.
centers around the tater tot.
Yes, all that centers around the tater tots. It's not like garbage fries. Garbage fries end up as fries. Garbage tots end up as almost a casserole, in my opinion. But that's food. Very good food, in my opinion. Very bad for you food, too. You do not eat this on a regular basis. But when you want to eat something really nice and bad for you, eat some garbage tots.
Gary wants to get out of the garbage podcast to go eat some garbage tots, so let's wrap this up.
Okay, last thing that I want to say of all is that I've always liked General Longstreet in this movie. I have to admit, I love the outsider who thinks differently, and they give him that role in here, and it's fun. I do like it. General Longstreet's really probably one of my more favorite, and a lot of people disagree that they probably made him more progressive than he probably was at this time in his life, but he does go on later historically to do a lot of things that show that he's a guy who thinks for himself. I think as far as the average human goes, he's very much somebody who is independent in a lot of ways.
I don't know enough history to talk about, but General Longstreet, portrayed by Tom Berenger, however you say his last name.
Berenger, you got it right.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we have gone for longer than 2 hours. I don't know if it's just the movies we watch, but I've noticed that during this and Dune, we tangent about the subject, but not on actual tangents. Does that make sense?
We just keep...
Well,
yeah,
it's like our tangents are on topic, but I don't know if that's just because of the movies we watched or if that's...
BJ,
that's what mutual friend brings to the table.
BJ, didn't I just do an entire tangent about garbage tots? But yes, you're right. We do kind of stay on topic.
Okay, so out of 4 hours, we've had one proper tangent.
But anyways. So Jeff likes Longstreet. I don't know. The North didn't really have apart from Chamberlain, didn't really have a character around which it focused a lot. There was Buford in the beginning, but then Buford kind of fades into the background. There's Chamberlain through most of it, and so
if I had to pick out problems with the movie, I wish they would have done more on the Union side. It's
it's kind of they focus on the Confederate leaders, but they don't focus on a Confederate regiment. The Union gets that.
There's a lot more attention paid to the Union soldiers and a lot more attention paid to the Confederate leadership as opposed to their soldiers. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there.
I suppose you could argue that, but for the majority of the last act of the movie, Day 3, it is almost purely from the Confederate side with a smattering of character moments.
Yes.
Well, they're the ones. They're the ones who are really controlling the situations. They're the ones making the big decisions on what to do next, and the Union is just trying to anticipate them.
All the Unions.
So I get why you would do that. You would focus on them.
After day one, all the Union had to do was sit there. All they had to do was sit there in one spot and do nothing, and they would win. And they knew that from the battle.
Well, quote unquote, all they had to do was quote unquote sit there and do nothing.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that. You're right, but they basically had the idea of what they needed to do was just be in that one position, and it was up to the South to dictate where they were going to hit. But all the North had to do was basically sit in their defensive. They didn't push out. They didn't maneuver anything after day one. They were basically in position, and it was up to the South to maneuver into the correct or incorrect position to attack from. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, there's another tangent here, which is completely somewhat unrelated, but we talked about Grant a little bit, which this movie does not cover. I have to say that Grant is one of the more interesting people of the Civil War, especially because he was not really a person of consequence before the war started. He was not terribly wealthy. He actually was kind of an alcoholic, and he probably would have been a person that would have faded into nothing in history. But then the Civil War happened. He has military experience, which is now very valuable. He gets a command, which he does better than any other general for the most part. And so he rises in the ranks because he shows that he can accomplish things, even though there's a lot of controversy over him. You know, he still outperforms others.
Oh, the
And
controversy
and then he becomes
around
president later, so it's like
the-
his whole life takes a different path because of this.
the controversy about Grant, I feel, has kind of been cleared up recently, because a lot of the controversy about Grant was how do I phrase this? The smearing of Grant was sort of done in the service of the reputation of Lee. You know, for a time we could not say that, oh, Grant was just a better general than Lee. We had to say that, oh, well, Grant was an alcoholic that only won because he kept throwing manpower at Lee and blah blah blah, yakety smackety. But as history has been re-examined, that
also it did kind of have to do, BJ did have to do with the class issue as well, because as Jeff said, he did not come from the upper class. He came from like this very much a lower class. He was a what was it called, the supply. He was the supply officer.
Grant was a quartermaster. He got, I read the book, but it was a while ago, and I've seen some documentary about Grant. He left military because he did have a problem with alcohol. So that's why he left military. At the time the Civil War started, he had tried to start a couple businesses and failed. He was working as a clerk in his family shop. And then from that he goes on to become the Supreme Commander of the Union Army, President of the United States.
Not important at all to being incredibly important,
but
on the national stage.
But it's a class thing, and people couldn't understand, or at least the people of the time did not want someone from this lower class of citizenry to be even for a long time. They didn't want this lower class person to be as famous as he was, because he was seen to be this rough and uncouth person, but in reality, like, there was a fair amount of character assassination going on. You're right.
Well, for a time, Grant was pretty much the most famous American in the world. You know, I don't know if you guys know the story behind him writing his autobiography, but the basics, he got swindled out of pretty much everything he owned. So, and he was pretty much dying of cancer. So he basically wrote his memoirs I think it was at the suggestion of Mark Twain. Mm-hmm. Like in all seriousness, Mark Twain was in on this, and the last thing Grant did was to write his memoirs to help provide for his family after he died. I think he died like 2 weeks or 2 days. He died very shortly after he got done with the memoirs, and they sold so well that his family was well taken care of after he died because of the memoirs. So yeah.
And then history waxes and wanes as to how popular he is as opposed to Lee. And currently we're in the area where I would never want to say that we're in the moment where people can be judged merely by their own particular actions, because people are never going to do that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're always going to
Yeah.
judge a person by the lens through which we live now. So
Yeah, we'll say that Grant's reputation is on the rise while Lee's reputation is on the decline.
yeah, but we're always going to judge people by what we understand now. So we're always going to. So right now, people judge Lee because he's part of the South, as opposed to his own personal actions taken in context of the time. So and Grant as well. It's unfortunate that people don't want to observe people that way, and even I have to really work hard about that as a person. But anyways,
turns out history is complicated, but people like to look at things black and white.
Oh yeah, it's really easy to look at things black and white. But anyways,
well, it's like when your sports team loses or wins, you decide, oh well, if that coach just did this or that, I know what's going on. People have that mentality where it's like, yeah, it's just like this.
Wait, my team won. Yeah. My team won because they're the best ever, or my team lost because the other side were cheating scum.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not bitter about the fact that the Bulls got all the ref calls during the '98 NBA Finals. No, sir, not bitter about that at all.
You aren't bitter about that at all, BJ. I don't hear about that all the time from you at all.
I'm not bitter about the fact they made that documentary about '98 Bulls like last year, the year before, and the Utah Jazz are the bad guys. Yeah, the small market team, they're the real villains here.
Well, you have to have your heroes, and
if I roll my eyes hard enough, can you hear it?
No.
Yeah, so people romanticize people in history, but then they also villainize them.
Yeah.
And I think you have to think
one of the
critically.
benefits
the whole
of
point
this
is to think about things, not just assume one extreme or the other.
There's a few movies that actually really try to examine things from that objective perspective, and Gettysburg is one of those where they try to give everybody at least a semi-fair shot. There's this one. I think it's Tora 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 is like a Japanese movie about Pearl Harbor, and they try to tell things from both perspectives, and both of them are lauded by historians because they don't look at it from just a black and white perspective. They look at it from that complicated, messy perspective of history.
Yeah, I have not watched Tora 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 in the end. Jeff has mentioned it's one of his favorite movies, so that might be a movie in our future.
Yeah, it might be, because it's, from what I hear, they really work hard to view things from both sides. And
I think
they do, and that movie completely failed. It like nobody watched it. It was unpopular, and so I think people in Hollywood learned that you can't tell a story too well. You have to embellish a little bit to keep the audience engaged, which is why most historical movies do embellish a little bit.
And even Gettysburg at the time didn't do the. I mean, obviously, like I said before, it's pretty much become required watching in U.S. history classes because lots of different reasons, but still.
Okay, here's the loaded question. Unless, BJ, you can go ahead. I'll save my loaded question.
So I was going to say, well, I mean, you'll take in the fact that the Tora 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 came out in 1970, so that was like, 35 years after the war ended?
Yeah, feelings were too soon.
And Gettysburg was filmed in 93, so that's like, 130 years after the war ended, and there's still, as we have discussed, there's still feelings about that 160 years later.
Yeah, well, even now there's still feelings about it, and yeah.
So here, this was part of my loaded question. This could even be the final question if you want, because it's getting really old. But do you think that this movie treated both sides fairly as far as representing their points of view in the battle? Is this movie like pro-Union or pro-Confederate? I mean, or is it down the middle?
It shows the arguments that the Confederacy were making, but it also shows the folly of those arguments. Even amongst the Confederate side, they can kind of understand when you get into when people are talking about the politics of the situation, especially in Longstreet when he has his interactions with Pickett and whatnot. In some of the campfire talks that they're having, you can see that they have their justifications in their mind, but they can understand that those justifications aren't like the world's greatest. In that, I think they were trying to be as fair as they could be for a quote unquote modern audience. This is 93, but even then there was some very problematic ideas with the war's motivations. I mean, obviously,
right.
the North had their very clear-cut motivation of let's free the slaves and preserve the Union. Two very clear-cut motivations versus the very
But
messy
even that
motivations.
motivation like took time for it to form.
Yeah,
It wasn't completely solid from the beginning. It was really kind of loose as they were just trying to keep people following the law and preserved in the Union.
well, preserve the Union was always a rallying cry for the North, but more and more free the slaves became a huge chunk of it because it was like, okay, we're doing this to make humanity make our section of humanity very reasonable and very good. So
Yeah, again, history's complicated.
yes.
In the moment, I felt like they might have been romanticizing the South a little bit, but not to like a egregious extent. And I guess you could argue if you take motives out, the kind of like what Jeff said before, the South had the more interesting characters. But
I think
to be fair, I do think that they do portray both sides. They do show the follies of the South and the follies of Lee. So yes, more or less it's fair.
Yeah, they show some mistakes of the Union. There was in the 20th Maine, they have that soldier who complains about the bad leadership and the mistakes and how they've had tremendous losses and they feel like their leadership has led them to these disasters. And they have so many people that have been lost. So you get that too added in, where it's not that they paint the Union as this perfect army either. There's lots of bad things and difficult things happening. And he talks about how there are officers who just don't care about their men, which is always a situation where you have different classes, where you have upper class rich people leading poor people, and they just don't have the feelings of their well-being. So it shows the difficulty and the complexity of both sides. I think it does that. And I don't know. The other part that people worry about is they say, well, you can't romanticize the South, and I think it's disingenuous to not talk about the reality of what the South were trying to do. They were trying to preserve this particular freedom, which is morally problematic, which was slavery. But at the same time, as long as you don't like get too far away from that and you keep that as part of the reality of what it was, I don't think that they do anything wrong by showing that these Confederates were brave and they fought for their statehood and what they thought was right. And yeah, there were problems. They don't hide the problems within their philosophy, but they don't treat them as stereotypical villains either.
Yeah,
they try to show it as honest
their bravery
as they can.
without believing in their cause.
Yeah, in that they do a pretty good job of kind of maneuvering through that particular part or problem. So they're able to do that particular maneuver well in this particular instance, which is why the movie hasn't been completely like shelved by everybody. It's still watchable even what 30 years now. It's gone on 30 years later. It's still people still watch it because of its historical accuracy, because it was made relatively recently, because I mean, yeah, it's a pretty good depiction of this particular subject. Without making one side or the other to be the ultimate villain or hero. Obviously, the South is the quote unquote villains in this particular case, but I mean, history is written by the winners. So
part of it just comes down to the fact that people don't get along, and when they don't get along, this is what happens. Yeah. So anyway, it shows the terrible, and there was President Jimmy Carter used to take world leaders on tours of the Gettysburg Park, and he would walk through it and he would say, this is what happens when you let things go too far and you don't get along and you don't believe in compromise and you just let division continue to grow and grow and grow, and you don't try to get people to unite under some common idea. This is what the consequences are. That was actually from a commentary that Martin Sheen said, because he met Jimmy Carter, and who was a huge fan of, well, not a huge fan. He was a big student of the Civil War, but anyway, that comment had nothing to do with Jimmy Carter. It was just about. Yeah, there's for anyone who has different feelings about Jimmy Carter. This is not political. It was just about how. Yeah, never mind.
Yeah, that's good. There's a couple of comments I'm going to send there about various and sort of things, but we try not to get too political around here, so I'm not going to say.
We're not. We're very politically neutral on this podcast. We don't. Yeah. Anyway.
Try not. But anyways, yeah. So watch. Don't watch.
Watch.
Oh, watch. Yeah.
But yes. Be warned, it is a very long movie, 4 hours plus.
Get your hobbies stuff. Get whatever you're doing that's not watching a movie. Get it ready. Snacks, food, hobby. If you have to watch it in sections, watch it in sections, because it's a long watch.
Yeah, I was going to ask how many turns did you manage to paint during this, but I guess that's not out yet, is it?
No, it's not out, but guess what? My wife did paint because we had some Space Marines, and she's thinking about picking up the hobby, so she's done and she's done a few. She did a few in this movie, boy. So... Funny stuff, huh? Yeah, anyways.
One of these days, we're going to go off on the 40K thing, just going to have no idea what the heck we're talking about. But it turns out today is not that day.
Were there Tyranids in the Civil War? What?
No.
Which side were the Space Marines on? What are we talking about?
I put Space Marines on the side of the South. The Tyranids would be purely on the side of the North. Purely.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
This is what happens when we talk about history. Yes.
There's so many jokes I'm going to make about Ultramarines, but we're running out of time.
We are running out of time, people, so... Yeah.
Gary's hungry. He already mentioned his wife is standing over his shoulder once. We should bring this to an end.
Yes. So...
All right.
For the moment, you are spared the Warhammer 40K talk.
Okay.
Anyway, so, Gary, thank you, or mutual friend, we've done a very bad job of maintaining that joke. What joke, you ask? Well, watch our next episode, Dune, which is Gary's actual debut episode, and you'll find out.
Yep.
Oh, it's Dune 1984, by the way, not the new one, because we're not about new movies around here. We're about old, weird movies.
Indeed we are.
So, I ask this out of habit, and I cringe as I do. Any final thoughts? It's like
I'm going to keep my mouth shut, because I got garbage tots waiting for me.
I would say it's the
I think the garbage talks say it all, BJ.
So, okay. So Gary, thank you for joining us once again. As always, you have an open invite.
Mm-hmm.
So special thanks to special guest Gary, a.k.a. mutual friend. I'm BJ. With me is Jeff, and we will see you next time. Bye.